Good morning, class. Take your seats and be prepared to shut up. Today we're going to learn about the Cuban Missile Crisis, aka when the 100 almost became a reality.
It's been 97 years since a nuclear apocalypse killed everyone on Earth. You're being sent to the ground.
Hell no!
The planet's simmering in radiation.
So how did Cuba and the United States become such mortal enemies? Well, in 1953, Fidel Castro led the Cuban Revolution against the authoritarian government run by Fulgencio Batista. And after 6 years of fighting in this Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro won, taking over Cuba with the Communist Party. And the rise of this Communist Party caused conflict between the US and Cuba. This was because of the US's ultimate fear of communism during the Cold War. Their strong allyship went downhill from there. Hold on, I need a coffee break. Their economic relations also became weakened because Cuba relied on their exports of sugar to the United States as their main source of money. Their sugar exports actually consisted of 80% of their exports. And the United States told certain industries in Cuba not to use United States oil. In addition, after the trade relations continued to deteriorate, the Dwight D. Eisenhower administration closed the embassy in Havana, Cuba on January 3rd of 1961. This increased tensions way worse, and if tensions weren't bad enough, the closing of the US embassy caused all hopes of peace to go down the drain. Eisenhower had actually, soon before closing the embassy, started planning the Bay of Pigs invasion in about 1960, late 1960, early 1960. The Cuban refugees would actually betray their own government and try and take it over. And Cubans also flew planes to bomb their air bases. However, this was carried through by the Kennedy administration and utterly failed. This caused Kennedy to look incredibly weak in the eyes of Americans and Cubans. So this failed, and this was attempted in April of 1961 and completely failed. And it failed because Fidel Castro already knew what was happening. So, how did Castro find out about Bay of Pigs? Someone squealed.
Wow!
Oh, so funny. Okay. And Fidel Castro was ready with more than enough troops to overpower the threat that came into his country. And the already fragile relations between US and Cuba escalated astronomically and led to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The Cuban Missile Crisis, which took place in 1962, was a climax of confrontation and struggle between the US and Soviet Russia, bringing the two superpowers closer than ever to nuclear war. It occurred right after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, which was the culmination of containment policies, the Red Scare, and an attempt to overthrow dictator Fidel Castro, aka Justin Trudeau's biological father. After Bay of Pigs, Khrushchev made a deal with Castro to place missiles in Cuba to protect against future attempted invasions. U.S. intelligence caught wind of the plans, and Kennedy issued a public warning. U.S. airplanes flew over Cuba and took pictures of what was, sure enough, missile-based construction sites. Kennedy then looked to his advisors on what to do. Unfortunately, they were split. One side favored issuing a stern warning to Castro and opting for diplomacy rather than force. Then the other side wanted to issue an immediate airstrike and invasion of Cuba. Kennedy decided to do neither. He issued a naval quarantine, not a blockade, a quarantine, because a blockade would implicate a state of war. Kennedy then sent a sweet little letter to Khrushchev explaining that he would not permit nuclear weapons to be in Cuba and demanded they be removed at once. He then went on U.S. television to inform the public, and this is what he said.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Khrushchev wrote back saying that blockade, even though it was really a quarantine, was an act of aggression and he would not turn Soviet ships around. However, when the ships reached the blockade, a few did turn around because they were too scared. The only that were allowed to go through the blockade were ones that were known to not have any dangerous materials on them. So, The U.S. then moved into DEFCON 2 status when routine flights said that the construction sites were done and missiles were ready for use.
Okay, so like
The U.S. Oh no, this marker sucks. Okay. Okay, so the U.S. we went into DEFCON 3. Yeah, okay, we went into it from flying over Cuba. This is a plane. And we saw the construction of things happening. And then we went into DEFCON 2 after that because there were missiles that were ready to be launched. And then so like DEFCON 3 came before DEFCON 2, but then like DEFCON 2 came after DEFCON 3. And then DEFCON 3 was the thing that happened, but it happened before DEFCON 2. And DEFCON 2 happened after DEFCON 3. And so like, yeah, so the DEFCON happened this one first, and then this one. And then because DEFCON 3 led to DEFCON 2, it led to
Comic-Con. Get it?
all resulting to Comic Con.
Nailed it.
On October 26th, Kennedy decided that the only way to get rid of the missiles in Cuba was by using force, and he planned an invasion. But he still wanted to give diplomacy a little bit more time. Then on the same day, an ABC News reporter, John Scaly, went to Kennedy claiming that he was approached by a Soviet agent that said that the Soviet Union and the United States could reach negotiations. He said that Russia would retract the missiles from Cuba if the US promised not to invade the island. That night, Khrushchev sent a little message to Kennedy, and he said this:
If there's no intention to doom the world to the catastrophe of thermonuclear war, then let us not only relax the forces pulling on the ends of the rope, let us take measures to untie that knot. We are ready for this.
We are ready.
They were all ready to make peaceful, simple resolutions, but then Khrushchev came in demanding a longer than expected list of accommodations. Among those, he wanted the US to remove their Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Kennedy, like a stone-cold savage, decided to ignore the second message and continue down the planned route. Then on the 28th, Khrushchev ordered a statement saying that the Soviet missiles would indeed be removed from Cuba. The US was planning on removing the Jupiter missiles from Turkey anyway, but they didn't tell the Soviet Union this because they're cool. And then this concluded the Cuban Missile Crisis. And as a result, there was a hotline set up between the White House and the Kremlin to allow for better communication and understanding. And then both countries began to reconsider their role in the arms race and took the first steps towards a test ban treaty to avoid nuclear war. And that's the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, would you look at that? Time for the mystery document. Oh, it's Blankets 2018. I missed. That's okay. I will recycle that later. All right, so December 15th, 1958 in Puerto Rico. I realized that it will always be a cardinal tenet of American foreign policy not to intervene in the internal affairs of other nations, and this is particularly true in Latin America. I realized that we cannot force out any duly constituted government, however repugnant its methods or views may be, particularly when we have no guarantee that its successors in the long run will be a real improvement, but an announced policy of non-intervention because a sham when it is turned off and on to suit our own purposes. For there is little question that should any Latin country be driven by repression into the arms of the communists, our attitude of non-intervention would change overnight. Well, let me think about this. Who do you think this is? Well, I know Kennedy was very adamant with the Latin American relations, so I'm going to go with Kennedy. Am I right?
She right. It was Kennedy.
Right. Ow! So give the bloopers in the end.
Yeah.
Nuclear weapons. Sorry. Jeez. Paige keeps typing and it's moving all my stuff down. Stop it! If there is no intention to doom the world to the wait, he's Russian. Okay. If it is no intention.
If there is no intention.
If there is no intention to doom the world to the that's French. If there is no intention. Oh my god. So how did the
Your voice just cracked.
This party came to a power in 19. It's okay, I don't. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Just delete the.
Is that all? Go. Whenever you're ready. Yes. Yes, it's focused.
Oh, would you look at this? Today's mystery document.
Yeah. I thought this would be smoother than it actually is.
I drew a how to meet her.
Go. You didn't.
They're
Is that good enough?